My life as a professional was terribly lonely. I worked long hours in the office. I stayed late most nights. I saw my friends occasionally, mostly on the weekends. Pretty soon, I fell into this pattern of frozen dinners and an unhealthy addiction to Netflix. By your laughs, I don't think I did anything too unusual. I mean, to get there, I followed a pretty normal path. Grew up in a small town. I went to a nice university. I made friends. I graduated. I got a job. That's where the problem started. You see, after I graduated university, I expected my social life to continue on in much the same way. I was looking forward to it. Late dinners, discussions about the meaning of it all. But then the reality hit. Because my friends from uni not only got different jobs in different offices, but they moved to different cities too. Far away, places like Paris and New York, Beijing. We didn't see each other very often, but in each of these anonymous cities, we went on and tried to meet people, which unfortunately looked a lot like this. It seemed to involve these awkward conversations in bars. Over the blaring music, the flashing lights, it really wasn't the setting to meet new friends. And pretty quickly, I gave up. As I said, I don't think this is unusual. We're all craving authentic connections. However, we're also all living this mobile lifestyle. Thousands of airline points, hours of travel are going to separate us from our loved ones, so that we'll reunite with them maybe once or twice a year. How can we overcome that isolation of our mobile lifestyles to form true, authentic relationships? That question fascinated me for years. So, armed with my degree in psychology, I hit the books. I pored over lab reports, journals in psychology, all focused on authentic human connections. And I expected these to contain the Holy Grail. Now, I found some really interesting theories in there, things that formed the basis of my later research. But, and apologies to the scientists in the room, I also recognize that what happens inside of a lab study can be very different to what happens in the real world. And I wanted to know how to form true connections, day to day. So I created my own experiment, and I recruited some friends to help. 50 of them. They were from all over the world, all different backgrounds. Each of my friends agreed to become an undercover agent for connection. They did social experiments on their friends, their families, colleagues, even people they just met. This is how it worked. Every week, I would send an assignment to all of the agents, asking them to do something a bit different. It ranged from spend an entire conversation just listening, to jump in a lake and try to get people to follow you. My agents went out, they did the assignments, and they reported back. Some of them had some pretty great successes in connecting with people, and others were a disaster. But we learned a lot from both types. So, for example, one of the assignments that I sent was to produce a thoughtful invitation. There was an agent in San Francisco who took me up on it. She invited 10 friends to dinner on Saturday. The trick was that none of these friends knew each other in advance. So she set out to convince them that spending Saturday night together was the best use of their time. The way she did it was interesting. She made a video of each of her friends. There were photos, little interesting bits about their hobbies, quirks, personal stories. She put it together and sent it out with the invitation to dinner. So essentially, all of her friends had already met each other. First off, no one could refuse such a thoughtful invitation. They all came to dinner. Even better, all of those facts created an interesting conversation such that they're all friends to this day. She formed connections. Here's another example. I sent a second assignment asking the agents to find someone they know well and to ask that person to do a new activity together, something they'd never tried. One of the agents was driving home for the weekend, 6 hours. So he took the opportunity to invite his family to game night. Now, this was a special occasion because his whole family was finally home. His sister had also flown in from out of state. And normally they would watch a movie. Okay, movie, game night, doesn't seem like too big of a difference. But think about it. When you're watching a film, you're not necessarily discussing it or bonding or connecting over the experience. When you're playing games, you're chatting and having an interesting conversation. And that happened. The family had the best conversation they'd had in years together. Okay, how does this all add up? Through stories like these, the agents and I found that there were certain tactics which always worked. Across friends, family, colleagues, there were certain things that you could do to consistently create authentic connections. Here's the thing. If I could summarize all of those specific tactics, it would be in one major theory, and this is, it's not about how much time you spend, it's about how you spend your time. It's about creating a moment that actually matters. Okay, I'm sure you've heard that before. Quality over quantity, yeah, it's important, we got it. But hang on. Consider the common intuition that you act on in your everyday life. We all do it. When I ask people what's holding them back from having real, authentic connections, the common response is, I just don't have time to keep up with everyone. Let's map out the difference. So we've got time on the horizontal axis and quality on the vertical axis. What I mean by quality is how much you value that relationship, how much it really enriches your life. And common intuition, more time, more quality. Let's think of a different common intuition instead. Think about your boss. How much time do we all spend with our bosses over the months, years that we work together? And how much do we value that relationship? I won't embarrass you with a show of hands, but if I asked, I think we'd all have very different answers to that question. Okay, so if this line isn't correct, let's draw a new line. Let's say, for example, that you meet someone new at a dinner party. You have a great conversation, and you meet again and again. You spend great time together. You do things you're both interested in. It's quality time, and again. And pretty soon, that person's your best friend. Okay, that's a pretty good example. It only took a baseline amount of time to get to a pretty high-quality relationship. But not everyone who you meet at a dinner party becomes your best friend. Let's take a look at another line. Let's say this is the person who works down the hall from you. You meet in an annual office retreat. You get along okay. You say hi in the hallways. Maybe you have lunch together sometimes. But that person will never become more than an acquaintance. It's all right, but conceivably, you could spend the same amount of time with these two people, yet the way that that relationship enriches your life, how much you value it, is vastly different. Here's the million-dollar question. How do you move someone onto the higher trajectory? The agents and I figured out certain tactics which always worked. I'm going to give you 3. 1, ask great questions. When you're first meeting someone particularly, skip through the where are you from and what do you do as quickly as possible. It's not interesting. Instead, try a new question, an interesting one. Even start with, what was the latest thing that you saw in the news? What did you think about it? Ask about someone's family. Anything to get an interesting answer. Because when you ask interesting questions, you'll get interesting answers. 2, listen to the answers. If you want to actually connect with someone, don't bring them to a pub that's blaring rock music. Go to a coffee shop, go for a walk, anywhere you can where you're actually listening to those answers. 3, connect with true empathy. Each time you start a conversation, take a moment to put yourself in the other person's shoes. Imagine what her favorite restaurant is, what she likes to do for fun. When you take that moment of care, it really shows for the authentic connection. That's how you get someone onto the higher trajectory. When you take that moment, you'll be able to form the authentic connections and set someone off to become the best friend. Now, some of you may recognize these tactics. I never go anywhere without my agents, and they were here today. They spoke to many of you during the breaks, and maybe if you met an interesting person over lunch or in the coffee line, you might have bumped into them. We did this to prove a point, and that is, these tactics don't help if you leave them lying on a page somewhere or embedded in a video. You have to go out and practice them to make it work. When you do, you'll form those authentic connections and set people off on the higher trajectory. In summary, it's not about how much time you spend that matters, it's how you spend your time. Thank you.